Two poor, curious, and determined twin sisters explore an abandoned house on the outskirts of their neighborhood. Inside, they hear faint knocking coming from the attic and decide to investigate, even though they are afraid. When they force the lock, they discover a dehydrated man in shock, unaware that he is a reclusive millionaire. The girl's simple gesture triggers a revelation so profound that it changes the lives of all three forever. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The black Bentley moved silently through the tree-lined streets of Millfield, Massachusetts, attracting curious glances from the few locals out on that crisp October morning. Behind the wheel, Ethan Reynolds gripped the steering wheel tighter as familiar landmarks appeared through the windshield. 25 years had passed since he'd last seen this place, yet everything seemed frozen in time. The white church steeple, the brick library, the sprawling oak trees that canopied Main Street. At 40, Ethan had achieved what most would consider the American dream. His tech security company had made him a silent fortune. He owned properties in Manhattan, San Francisco, and London. His name appeared occasionally in business magazines, though he declined most interview requests. To the outside world, Ethan Reynolds was the epitome of calculated success, methodical, reserved, and unfailingly precise. No one knew about the bottled water he kept within arm's reach at all times, or the nightlights that burned in every room of his penthouse, or how he insisted on sitting near exits in restaurants and avoided crowded elevators. These quirks, invisible to his colleagues and associates, were the lingering echoes of a childhood trauma he'd never fully processed. "How you've arrived at your destination," announced the navigation system as Ethan pulled up to a wrought iron gate partly obscured by overgrown vegetation. Beyond it stood Hillcrest Manor, a two-story Victorian house with peeling paint and boarded windows. The property sat on the outskirts of Millfield, isolated from neighboring homes by acres of unkempt grounds and tall trees. Ethan had purchased the property through a shell company 3 months earlier. The realtor had been eager to unload the place, mentioning something about the house being difficult to sell due to its state of disrepair and unfortunate history. Ethan hadn't asked for elaboration. He punched in the gate code and drove up the gravel driveway. Dead leaves swirled in the Bentley's wake as he approached the house. For a moment he sat motionless in the car, staring at the imposing structure. What was he doing here? Had he lost his mind coming back to Millfield? The logical part of his brain, the part that had built his fortune through calculated risks and strategic decisions, told him to turn around, drive back to Boston, and catch the next flight to New York. Instead, he got out of the car. The house key was heavy in his hand. When he pushed open the front door, it creaked on rusty hinges. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and neglect. Ethan stepped into the foyer, his expensive Italian shoes leaving imprints on the dusty hardwood floor. "Home sweet home," he muttered to himself, setting down his leather weekend bag. The renovation team would arrive next week. They'd been given specific instructions: update the plumbing, electrical, and structural elements, but preserve the original character of the house. Ethan wanted to spend this first week alone, getting a feel for the place before construction began. He methodically toured each room, taking inventory. The first floor featured a grand parlor, a formal dining room, a study with built-in bookshelves, and a kitchen with outdated appliances from the 1980s. As he moved from room to room, Ethan placed bottled water on every available surface: side tables, windowsills, countertops. A habit formed long ago. The second floor held 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. Ethan had arranged for minimal furnishings to be delivered: just a bed, a desk, and some essentials in the master bedroom. He wouldn't need more for his temporary stay. But it was the attic that drew his attention. At the end of the upstairs hallway, a narrow door led to a steep staircase. Ethan paused at the entrance, his heart rate accelerating slightly. Confined spaces had always triggered his anxiety. Yet he forced himself to climb the steps. The attic stretched the length of the house, with sloping ceilings and small dormer windows that let in weak streams of afternoon light. Dust particles danced in the beams. The space was emptier than he expected, just some old furniture covered in sheets and several cardboard boxes stacked in the corner. Ethan approached the boxes, curiosity overcoming his discomfort. The first contained old dishes wrapped in yellowed newspaper. The second held Christmas decorations, glass ornaments and tangled strings of lights. The third box, however, made him pause. Inside were newspapers, dozens of them, dating back to the late 1990s. One headline caught his eye. "Local boy missing for 3 days found in abandoned building." His own name was printed in smaller text below. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he lifted the newspaper. Someone had circled the article with red ink. He hadn't expected to find something so directly connected to his past here. Who had collected these papers? And why were they stored in this house? He noticed something else. Beneath the newspapers was a child's blanket, faded blue with stars on it. Familiar, yet not. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest, the beginning of memories trying to surface. He quickly replaced everything and closed the box. That night, after unpacking and ordering takeout from the only Chinese restaurant in town, Ethan sat in the study with his laptop open, but ignored. Instead, his attention kept drifting to the ceiling, to the attic above, to the box of newspapers with his name circled in red. He had returned to Millfield with a purpose, to confront the fractured memories of his childhood trauma. At 15, Ethan had disappeared for 3 days. When found, he was locked inside an abandoned building, severely dehydrated and in shock. The circumstances were never fully explained, and his family had quickly moved away from Millfield, burying the incident under layers of silence and denial. The official story was that he had wandered into the building while exploring and accidentally locked himself in. But Ethan's fragmented memories suggested something more deliberate. Someone had put him there, and that someone had wanted him to suffer. For years, therapists had encouraged him to revisit Millfield, to confront his past directly. But Ethan had built his life around avoiding exactly that. Instead, he channeled his energy into creating security systems, as if protecting others could somehow retroactively protect his younger self. The sound of a branch scraping against a window startled him. Ethan looked up, suddenly aware of how dark the house had become. He switched on more lights and checked his watch. Nearly midnight. As he prepared for bed, placing water bottles on both nightstands and turning on every lamp in the bedroom, Ethan wondered if coming back had been a mistake. The box in the attic troubled him. It seemed too coincidental, buying this specific house and finding newspapers about his own trauma. Sleep came fitfully that night. Ethan dreamed of narrow spaces, of darkness, of thirst. He woke several times, reaching automatically for water. Around dawn, he gave up on sleep entirely and went downstairs to make coffee. The morning light transformed the house, making it less foreboding. Ethan took his coffee to the back porch, which overlooked what must have once been an impressive garden. Now it was overgrown with weeds and volunteer saplings. Beyond the garden stood an old gazebo, its white paint peeling but its structure still intact. Something about the gazebo nagged at him. Had he seen it before? Ethan stared at it, trying to connect it to a memory, but nothing came. His phone rang, breaking his concentration. It was his assistant in New York. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm confirming the contractors will arrive next Monday as arranged. They've requested clarification about the attic renovations. Do you still want the original door preserved or replaced with something more modern?" Ethan hesitated. "Keep the original door," he said finally, "but make sure it can't lock accidentally from the inside. In fact, make sure none of the doors in the house can lock without a key." "Of course, sir. And the board meeting scheduled for next week?" "I'll attend virtually. I'm staying in Massachusetts longer than originally planned." After ending the call, Ethan returned to the attic. The box of newspapers seemed to be waiting for him. This time he removed them all, spreading the articles across the dusty floor. Each one detailed a different aspect of his disappearance and discovery. Teen. Found dehydrated in abandoned mill building. Reynolds. Family declines comment on son's ordeal. Police. Close investigation into Millfield. Disappearance. The articles contained details he'd forgotten or repressed. How he was found with a near-empty water bottle clutched in his hand. How he kept repeating, "It's dark up there," when first discovered. How the building had been scheduled for demolition the very next day. Something else caught his attention. Several articles mentioned that the abandoned textile mill where he was found had been designed by architect Vernon Reynolds in the 1920s. The name sent an uncomfortable jolt through Ethan's body. Vernon Reynolds, his great-uncle, a distant relative he barely remembered except for a stern face and cold eyes at occasional family gatherings. Ethan searched through more papers, finding a small article about Vernon Reynolds' architectural legacy in Millfield. The piece mentioned several buildings, including a residential masterpiece called Hillcrest Manor. With growing unease, Ethan realized he was sitting in a house designed by the same man who had designed the building where he was trapped as a teenager. It couldn't be. Coincidence. He pulled out his phone and searched for information about Vernon Reynolds. There wasn't much. A brief Wikipedia entry mentioned his contributions to New England architecture in the early 20th century and his eccentric design, preferences, particularly his fascination with hidden spaces and rooms. Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air seeping through the attic's thin walls. He had been drawn to this house specifically, had felt compelled to buy it without fully understanding why. Now he wondered if some part of him had recognized the connection all along. He gathered the newspapers and returned them to the box, his mind racing. If Vernon Reynolds had designed both buildings, what other connections might exist? And why had Ethan been locked in the abandoned mill building all those years ago? The fragmented memories that had haunted him for decades suddenly seemed like pieces of a larger puzzle, one that might finally be assembled here, in this house in this town that he'd spent half his life trying to forget. As he descended the attic stairs, Ethan felt both dread and determination. He hadn't come back to Millfield simply to confront his past. He'd come to understand it, and perhaps finally to escape it. Across town, 16-year-old twins Lily and Emma Carter walked home from Millfield High School, their identical blonde ponytails swinging in rhythm. Despite being mirror images physically, the sisters possessed distinctly different personalities. Lily, older by 7 minutes, carried a camera around her neck and paused frequently to photograph architectural details of the historic houses they passed. Emma, the more practical of the two, consulted a map on her phone. "We've documented almost every historic building in the east part of town," Emma said, checking items off their digital list. "We still need to cover the outskirts for our project." Their AP history assignment required creating a visual archive of Millfield's architectural heritage. What had started as schoolwork had evolved into a passionate side project for the twins, who shared a fascination with the stories embedded in old buildings. "Did you hear about the old Hillcrest Manor place?" Lily asked, adjusting her camera strap. "Mrs. Peterson at the Historical Society said someone finally bought it, after sitting empty for like forever. Probably some developer who'll tear it down and build condos," Emma replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "We should try to photograph it before that happens." "Hillcrest is on my list for this weekend," Lily said. "It's supposed to have these amazing dormer windows and original Victorian detailing." The girls turned onto Cedar Street, where their modest 2-story house stood in a row of similar homes. Their Aunt Sarah's gardening skills were evident in the well-tended flower beds that lined the front walk, a splash of color against the house's pale blue siding. Sarah Carter had raised the twins since they were 8, when their parents had been involved in a serious accident that left them unable to care for their daughters. The girls rarely spoke about this part of their past, having adapted to their new normal under their aunt's loving but no-nonsense care. "We're home," Emma called out as they entered through the kitchen door. The scent of something baking greeted them. Their aunt emerged from the living room, reading glasses perched on her nose and a stack of bills in her hand. At 43, Sarah managed to run a successful catering business from home while raising her nieces. Her once auburn hair now showed strands of silver, and laugh lines framed her eyes. "There are oatmeal cookies cooling on the rack," she said. "How was school?" "Mrs. Abernathy loved our concept for the architecture project," Lily said, dropping her backpack on a kitchen chair. "We're thinking of going out to photograph Hillcrest Manor this weekend." Sarah's expression shifted subtly. "Hillcrest? That old place on the hill? I thought it was abandoned." "Someone bought it," Emma explained, already reaching for a cookie. "We want to document it before they renovate it and ruin all the original features." Sarah seemed to consider something before speaking. "That house has a history, girls. People around town have always been superstitious about it." "What kind of history?" Lily asked, immediately interested. She lived for these local legends and historical footnotes. Sarah shrugged. Just old stories. The architect who designed it was supposedly eccentric, built strange features into his buildings. Hidden rooms, unusual layouts. I think there was some scandal connected to him back in the day. That makes it even more interesting, Lily said, eyes lighting up. Maybe we can include some of those stories in our project. Just be careful if you go out there, Sarah cautioned. And call me when you arrive and when you leave. We will, the twins promised in unison. Later that evening, as the girls worked on homework in their shared bedroom, Lily researched Hillcrest Manor online. There wasn't much information available, just a few mentions in articles about local architecture and a blurry black-and-white photograph from the 1930s. Listen to this, she said to Emma, who was solving math problems at their desk. Hillcrest Manor was designed by Vernon Reynolds in 1927. Reynolds was known for incorporating secret passages and hidden rooms in his designs, supposedly inspired by his interest in mystery novels. Creepy, Emma commented without looking up from her calculus. There's more, Lily continued. Reynolds designed several buildings in Millfield, including the old textile mill that was demolished in the late 90s. She scrolled down further. Oh, weird. There's a mention here of a boy who went missing and was found in that mill building before they tore it down. This caught Emma's attention. What happened to him? Doesn't say much. Just that he was found locked in a room after being missing for 3 days. Lily clicked on another link. The boy's name was Ethan Reynolds, probably related to the architect. Do you think the new owner of Hillcrest knows about its history? Emma wondered. Probably not, Lily replied. Who buys a house because of some creepy architect ancestor? The twins fell silent, each absorbed in her own thoughts. Outside their window, darkness settled over Millfield, the streetlights casting pools of yellow on the quiet street. Saturday morning arrived with perfect fall weather, clear blue skies and just enough chill in the air to justify the matching scarves the twins wore as they set out on their bicycles. Their cameras and notebooks were packed in their backpacks, along with water bottles and granola bars. Text me when you get there, Sarah reminded them as they pedaled away, and be back for dinner at 6. The ride to Hillcrest Manor took 30 minutes, mostly uphill. By the time they reached the rusted iron gates, both girls were breathing hard. It's open, Emma noticed, pointing to the gap in the gate. Someone's been here recently. Maybe the new owner? Lily suggested, already lifting her camera to photograph the ornate ironwork. These gates are gorgeous. A look at the detail in these curls. They wheeled their bikes through the opening and followed the gravel driveway that wound through overgrown grounds. When the house came into view, both girls stopped to stare. Hillcrest Manor was larger than they had imagined, an imposing Victorian with a wraparound porch, multiple chimneys and the dormer windows Lily had mentioned. Despite its dilapidated condition, peeling paint, missing roof shingles and boarded-up windows, the house possessed undeniable grandeur. This is amazing, Lily breathed, snapping photos rapidly. Look at those gingerbread trims, and the stained glass in that transom window. Emma, always more cautious, noticed other details. There's a car parked around the side. Someone's definitely here. Maybe they'll let us look inside if we explain about our project, Lily suggested hopefully. Or maybe they'll call the cops and report us for trespassing, Emma countered. Let's just take exterior shots today. For the next hour, the twins circled the house, photographing architectural details and taking notes. Lily was particularly fascinated by the attic windows, small diamond-shaped openings that peered out from under the eaves like watchful eyes. I wonder what the attic looks like, she mused. Probably full of cool old stuff. As they moved around to the back of the house, they discovered an overgrown garden with the remains of stone pathways and a dilapidated gazebo. While Emma photographed the garden layout, Lily wandered toward a cellar entrance. The doors lay flat against the ground, one hanging partially open. Curiosity pulled Lily forward. She peered down into the darkness, her camera forgotten momentarily. "Hello?" she called softly, not really expecting an answer. To her surprise, she heard something, a faint tapping sound coming from somewhere inside the house. She listened more carefully. The sound was rhythmic, almost deliberate. "Emma," she called to her sister. "Come listen to this." Emma joined her reluctantly. "We shouldn't be snooping around someone's basement, Lily." "Just listen," Lily insisted. "Do you hear that tapping?" Emma fell silent, concentrating. After a moment, she nodded slowly. It sounds like someone knocking? It's coming from inside, Lily said, excitement building in her voice. What if someone's trapped in there? That's ridiculous, Emma replied, but she didn't sound convinced. It's probably just a loose shutter banging in the wind. There is no wind today, Lily pointed out, and it's too regular to be random. Listen, it's like Morse code or something. The tapping continued, faint but persistent. 3 short taps, then 3 longer ones, then 3 short ones again. That's SOS, Emma whispered, her face paling. Someone signaling for help. The twins exchanged a look that communicated volumes without words, a silent conversation possible only between those who had shared a lifetime of experiences. We should check, Lily said finally. We should call someone, Emma countered. By the time they get here, it might be too late, Lily argued. What if someone's hurt? We can at least look. Emma hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. But we stick together. And at the first sign of anything weird, we leave and call 911. Carefully, they pulled the cellar door fully open. Stone steps descended into darkness. Lily switched on her phone's flashlight and led the way, with Emma close behind. The cellar was damp and musty, filled with old furniture and discarded items. Cobwebs clung to the low ceiling, and their footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. At the far end, a door stood open, revealing a staircase that presumably led up to the main floor. Hello? Lily called again, louder this time. Is anyone here? Do you need help? The tapping stopped abruptly. Maybe they heard us, Emma whispered. The girls climbed the stairs to the main floor, emerging into a large kitchen with outdated appliances. Empty water bottles were scattered across the countertops, dozens of them. Some full, some partially empty. Someone's definitely staying here, Emma observed, picking up one of the bottles. This is weird. They moved through the kitchen into a hallway. The house was silent now, the tapping replaced by the subtle creaking of an old building settling. Hello? Lily called again. We heard tapping. Is someone here? A faint sound came from above them. Not tapping this time, but a thud as if something heavy had fallen. Upstairs, Emma said, pointing to the grand staircase that rose from the center of the hallway. The twins climbed the stairs slowly, alert to every sound. The second floor contained several bedrooms, one of which showed signs of occupation, a suitcase on a chair, a laptop on a desk, more water bottles arranged on every surface. This is getting creepy, Emma muttered. Someone has a serious thing for bottled water. At the end of the hallway, they found a narrow door slightly ajar. Beyond it, another staircase led upward. The attic, Lily whispered. I think the sound came from up there. Emma grabbed her sister's arm. Maybe we should leave and call for help. But Lily was already climbing the stairs, drawn forward by curiosity and concern. Emma followed reluctantly. The attic was darker than the rest of the house, with only thin streams of light entering through small windows. Dust particles danced in the air. At first glance, the space appeared empty, except for some old furniture and boxes. Hello? Lily called, her voice sounding strange in the enclosed space. Is anyone here? A weak thumping came from the far corner of the attic, behind what appeared to be an old wardrobe. The twins approached cautiously. As they drew closer, they could make out a small door in the wall, almost invisible in the dim light. It appeared to be stuck or possibly locked from the outside. Is someone in there? Emma called, pressing her ear to the door. A muffled voice responded, too faint to make out words, but definitely human. We'll get you out, Lily promised, examining the door. A simple latch held it closed, but it seemed to be stuck. She tugged at it with no success. There's an old iron bar over there, Emma said, pointing to a pile of discarded tools in the corner. Maybe we can use it as a lever. Lily retrieved the bar, and together they worked it into the space beside the latch. With a coordinated effort, they pushed, using the bar as a lever. The latch resisted, then suddenly gave way with a crack of splintering wood. The small door swung open, releasing a waft of stale air. Inside the cramped space was a man, disheveled, pale, with several days' growth of beard on his face. His expensive clothes were wrinkled and stained with sweat. Despite his condition, there was something distinguished about his features, something that suggested he didn't belong in this predicament. He blinked at the sudden light, raising a hand to shield his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse from thirst and disuse. Thank you, he said simply. I thought no one would come. Ethan Reynolds emerged from the small attic room shakily, gratitude and disbelief mingling on his face. The two teenage girls watching him with wide eyes couldn't be more than 16, yet they had managed to free him when no one else had even known he was trapped. "How long were you in there?" asked the girl holding the iron bar, her expression a mixture of concern and fascination. Ethan ran a hand through his disheveled hair, trying to regain his composure. 3 days, I think. Maybe 4. The door jammed when I was exploring the attic. I couldn't get it open from the inside. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, raspy from disuse and dehydration. "We should call an ambulance," the other girl said, already reaching for her phone. "No ambulance," Ethan said quickly. "No hospitals. I just need water." He gestured weakly toward the stairs. "There's plenty downstairs." The girls exchanged a skeptical glance that reminded Ethan of his executive team when they thought he was making a questionable decision. It was strange to see that look on such young faces. "At least let us call our aunt," the first girl suggested. "She can help." Ethan nodded, too exhausted to argue. As they helped him down the attic stairs, his legs nearly buckling beneath him, he realized how fortunate he was that these girls had found him. Another day in that stifling space, with its echoes of his childhood trauma, might have broken something inside him that could never be repaired. In the kitchen, the girl with the camera poured him a glass of tap water while her sister made a phone call in the next room. Ethan drank slowly, fighting the urge to gulp it down. Years of therapy had taught him how to manage the panic that came with thirst, how to remain methodical even when every cell in his body screamed for water. "I'm Lily. By the way," said the girl who had handed him the water, "that's my sister Emma on the phone. We're twins." "Ethan Reynolds," he replied automatically, then paused, wondering if he should have used an alias. But the moment for such precautions had passed. "Reynolds?" Lily's eyes widened. "Like Vernon Reynolds, the architect?" Ethan nodded cautiously. "My great-uncle. You know about him." "We're doing a project on Millfield's historic architecture for school," Lily explained. "Vernon Reynolds is one of the architects we're researching. He designed this house, right?" "Yes," Ethan confirmed, taking another careful sip of water. "Among other buildings in town, including the old textile mill that was torn down in the 90s, Lily added, watching him closely. "Were you the boy who was found there?" "The articles we read mentioned an Ethan Reynolds." Ethan felt a chill despite the kitchen's warmth. These girls had somehow connected dots that he himself was still trying to understand. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "That was me." Emma returned to the kitchen, slipping her phone into her pocket. "Aunt Sarah's on her way. She's bringing some food and first aid supplies. She wanted to call an ambulance, but I told her you refused." "Thank you," Ethan said sincerely. "I appreciate the help, but I'd prefer to keep this situation private." "Why were you in that room anyway?" Lily asked, her curiosity evidently overriding her sense of propriety. "I was examining the attic. I recently purchased this house and wanted to explore it thoroughly before renovations begin next week." Ethan shook his head. "Ironic, isn't it? I specifically instructed the contractors to ensure no doors could lock accidentally, yet I managed to get myself trapped before they even arrived." "But why did you buy this house?" Emma pressed, her expression more cautious than her sister's. "Especially if you were trapped in another building designed by Vernon Reynolds when you were younger." The question hung in the air, uncomfortably perceptive. Ethan considered deflecting, but something about these girls, their intelligence, their boldness in entering an abandoned house to help a stranger, made him opt for honesty. "I've been trying to understand what happened to me as a teenager," he explained. "The memories are fragmented. I thought coming back to Millfield might help me piece things together." He gestured around the kitchen. "I didn't know about the connection between this house and the mill building until after I'd purchased it. Finding out was unsettling." The sound of tires on gravel interrupted their conversation. Emma moved to the window. "That's Aunt Sarah," she confirmed. Moments later, a woman in her early 40s entered the kitchen carrying grocery bags. She had auburn hair streaked with silver and shrewd eyes that immediately assessed the situation. Those eyes widened slightly when they landed on Ethan. "You're Ethan Reynolds," she said, recognition clear in her voice. Ethan tried to recall if he'd met this woman before, but came up blank. "Do we know each other?" Sarah set the bags on the counter and began unpacking them with efficient movements. "Not directly, no. I was a senior at Millfield High when you disappeared. Everyone in town knew about it. She paused, glancing at the twins. Girls, there's a first aid kit in the car. Could you get it, please? The twins exchanged a look that suggested they knew they were being dismissed but complied, leaving Ethan alone with their aunt. You came back, Sarah stated once the girls were out of earshot. After all this time. To confront the past, Ethan admitted, though I didn't expect history to repeat itself quite so literally. He gestured toward the ceiling, indicating the attic room. Sarah removed a container of homemade soup from one of the bags and began looking for a pot. The town never forgot, you know. There were rumors for years. What kind of rumors? That it wasn't an accident. That someone had deliberately locked you in that mill building. She found a pot in a cabinet and set it on the stove. Some people said it was part of some cruel family tradition. Others thought it was related to the strange design features Vernon Reynolds built into his buildings. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Did anyone ever mention a name? Someone who might have been responsible? Sarah hesitated, keeping her back to him as she poured the soup into the pot. There was talk about a relative of yours who still lived in town at the time. Someone who'd worked with Vernon Reynolds. She turned to face him. But it was just gossip. Nothing was ever proven. This relative, Ethan pressed. What was his name? Russell Reynolds. Your father's cousin, I believe. Sarah watched him carefully. He still lives here, you know. On the other side of town. Keeps to himself mostly. Russell Reynolds. The name struck a chord, bringing with it a vague memory of a tall figure with cold eyes and a voice that could cut like steel. Ethan had a fleeting image of large hands pushing him backward into darkness. Thank you for telling me this, he said quietly. Sarah nodded, turning back to the soup. The girls don't know any of this. They weren't born when it happened, and I've never mentioned it. She stirred the soup slowly. Millfield prefers to forget its uglier stories. The twins returned with the first aid kit, their cheeks flushed from the cold air outside. Aunt Sarah makes the best chicken soup in Massachusetts, Lily announced as she set the kit on the counter. It fixes everything. Almost everything, Sarah amended with a small smile. She ladled soup into a bowl and placed it in front of Ethan along with a slice of bread. Eat slowly. Your stomach needs to readjust. Ethan followed her advice, taking small spoonfuls of the soup, which was indeed excellent. As warmth spread through his body, he felt his mind clearing, the fog of dehydration and panic receding. So what happens now? Emma asked, sitting across from him at the kitchen table. Will you go to the police about being trapped? Ethan shook his head. There's nothing to report. It was an accident, a stuck door in an old house. No crime was committed. But what about the newspapers in the attic? Lily interjected. The ones about your disappearance as a teenager. Someone collected those and stored them here. Don't you think that's suspicious? Ethan nearly choked on his soup. How do you know about those? We may have looked around a bit before we heard the tapping, Lily admitted, ignoring her aunt's disapproving look. We found a box with old newspapers. Your name was circled in red ink. Sarah frowned. Girls, I've told you about respecting private property. It's okay, Ethan assured her, though his mind was racing. Oh, you're right, Lily. Those newspapers raise questions. Someone collected articles about my disappearance and stored them in a house designed by the same architect who designed the building where I was trapped. It can't be coincidence. And now you got trapped again in another small space, Emma observed. That seems like more than coincidence, too. The kitchen fell silent as they all considered the implications. Outside, the afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the overgrown garden visible through the window. You should stay with us tonight, Sarah said suddenly. You're in no condition to be alone, and this house— She gestured around the kitchen. It doesn't seem safe. Ethan's instinct was to refuse. He'd built his life around self-sufficiency, around not needing or accepting help from others. But the thought of spending another night in this house, with its hidden rooms and unsettling connections to his past, made his skin crawl. That's very kind, he said finally. If you're sure it's not an imposition. We have a guest room, Sarah replied simply, and I'd feel better knowing you weren't alone after what you've been through. An hour later, Ethan found himself in the back of Sarah's practical sedan, a duffel bag with essentials beside him. The twins sat in the front, debating the merits of including Hillcrest Manor in their architecture project. We literally rescued someone from a hidden room, Lily argued. That's the most interesting thing about any building we've documented so far. But Mr. Reynolds might not want his experience included in a school project, Emma countered, glancing back at Ethan apologetically. It's Ethan, please, he corrected gently. And Emma's right. I'd prefer to keep today's events private, at least until I understand what's happening. The Carter home was modest but welcoming, a two-story colonial with blue siding and white trim. Inside, family photographs lined the walls of the living room, and comfortable, well-worn furniture filled the space. It was the antithesis of Ethan's sleek Manhattan penthouse, with its minimalist design and absence of personal touches. The guest room was small but comfortable, with a twin bed, a dresser, and a window that overlooked the backyard. Sarah provided clean towels and extra blankets, moving with the efficiency of someone accustomed to caring for others. Bathroom's down the hall, she explained. Girls' room is opposite. I'm at the end of the hall if you need anything. She paused at the door. There's a nightlight in the bathroom. I can leave the hall light on too if you prefer. Ethan looked at her sharply, wondering how she knew about his aversion to darkness. She met his gaze steadily. My brother, the girl's father, developed claustrophobia after a car accident, she explained. He couldn't stand being in the dark afterward. Always needed a light on. Always needed to know there was a way out. Yes, Ethan said softly. It's similar for me, Sarah nodded. Rest. We'll talk more tomorrow. After she left, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process the day's events. He'd come to Millfield seeking answers about his past, only to find himself trapped in a situation that eerily mirrored his childhood trauma. And now he was staying in the home of strangers who seemed to know more about his family history than he did. The name Russell Reynolds kept repeating in his mind. His father's cousin, a man who had worked with Vernon Reynolds, a potential link between the past and present. Ethan pulled out his phone and searched the name. There wasn't much. A mention in a local business directory listing Reynolds Architectural Preservation with an address on the north side of Millfield, and a few references in articles about historic restoration projects in Massachusetts. He set the phone aside and lay back on the bed, exhaustion finally overtaking him. As he drifted toward sleep, his mind filled with fragmented images. A small room with sloping ceilings, a water bottle being passed through darkness, a child's blanket with stars, and always, the sensation of being trapped with no way out. In the morning, he would begin searching for Russell Reynolds. But for now, in this house filled with the quiet sounds of a family going about their evening routine, Ethan Reynolds allowed himself the unfamiliar luxury of feeling safe. Ethan woke to the unfamiliar sounds of a household coming to life. Cabinet doors opening and closing, water running in pipes, voices murmuring downstairs. For a disorienting moment, he couldn't remember where he was. Then yesterday's events rushed back. The attic, the stuck door, the twins who had rescued him. Sunlight streamed through curtains he hadn't bothered to close the night before. Ethan checked his watch. 7:30 a.m. He never slept this late, even on weekends. At home in New York, his day would have already been underway for hours. Beginning with his 5 a.m. run in Central Park, followed by conference calls with international clients. He sat up slowly, taking inventory of his body. His throat no longer felt like sandpaper, and the pounding headache had subsided to a dull throb. The worst effects of his ordeal were fading, but the psychological impact remained. That familiar tightness in his chest when he recalled the small, dark space where he'd been trapped. After showering and changing into clean clothes from his duffel bag, Ethan made his way downstairs. The kitchen was empty except for a note on the table. Help yourself to breakfast. Coffee is ready. Sarah. He poured himself a cup from the carafe on the counter and looked around. The Carter home was lived in a way his own residences never were. Mail stacked on the counter, jackets hung haphazardly by the door, a half-completed jigsaw puzzle on a side table. It felt like a real home, not a showpiece. The back door opened, and Sarah entered carrying a basket of what appeared to be freshly cut flowers. "You're up," she observed, setting the basket on the counter. "How are you feeling?" "Much better," Ethan replied, raising his coffee cup in appreciation. "Thank you for your hospitality." Sarah nodded, arranging the flowers in a vase. "The girls already left for their weekend debate team practice. They'll be back around noon." She glanced at him. "I'm assuming you don't want to go to the police about what happened." "No, Ethan." "Confirmed." As I said yesterday, it was an accident, an unfortunate coincidence. Sarah's expression suggested she wasn't convinced. 2 incidents, 25 years apart, both involving you being trapped in buildings designed by Vernon Reynolds. That's quite a coincidence. Ethan set his cup down carefully. You mentioned Russell Reynolds yesterday. My father's cousin. What can you tell me about him? Sarah sighed, abandoning her flower arranging to sit across from him at the kitchen table. Russell was the town oddball when I was growing up. He lived in that big house on Maple Street. Still does, I think. He was some kind of architectural preservationist, always fighting to save Vernon Reynolds buildings from demolition or renovation. How was he connected to my family? Ethan asked. He was close to your grandfather, from what I remember. When your family moved away after your incident, Russell stayed. He became even more reclusive after that. Sarah hesitated, then added, there were rumors that he and your father had some kind of falling out before you disappeared. Something about Vernon Reynolds' legacy, and who had the right to control it. Ethan absorbed this information, trying to connect it to his own fragmented memories. I need to speak with him. Be careful, Sarah warned. Russell Reynolds has always been intense about his family's architectural heritage, almost obsessive. Their conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Sarah rose to answer it, returning moments later with an older man Ethan didn't recognize. He was in his 60s with a weathered face and alert eyes that widened slightly when they landed on Ethan. This is Frank Morris, Sarah introduced. Former detective with the Millfield Police Department. Frank, this is Ethan Reynolds. I know who he is, Frank said, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. Been a long time, son. Ethan stood, shaking the offered hand. Have we met before? I was assigned to your case back in '99, Frank explained. When you were found in the old mill building? I was just starting as a detective then. Frank's retired now, Sarah added, but he still consults occasionally on cold cases. Ethan felt a surge of interest. Here was someone who might have direct knowledge of his past. Do you remember the details of my case? He asked. Frank nodded. Some things you don't forget, even after all these years. I've kept tabs on you, actually. Read about your success in the tech world. Pretty impressive. Sarah called me this morning, Frank continued, accepting the coffee Sarah offered. Told me what happened at Hillcrest Manor. Said you might have questions about the past. Ethan glanced at Sarah, who shrugged. Frank knows more about what happened than anyone else in Millfield. I thought he might be able to help. The official report stated that I wandered into the mill building and accidentally locked myself in, Ethan began cautiously. But that's not what really happened, is it? Frank studied him over the rim of his coffee cup. What do you remember? Not much, Ethan admitted. Fragments, mostly. Being thirsty, the sound of someone walking above me, a small hand passing me a water bottle through darkness. He paused. I've always had the sense that someone put me in that building deliberately, that it wasn't an accident. Frank set his cup down with a sigh. Your parents insisted we classify it as an accident. They refused to consider any other possibility, even when evidence suggested otherwise. What evidence? Ethan demanded. The door to the room where you were found had been secured from the outside, Frank explained. Not just locked, blocked with a piece of lumber wedged against it. And you had bruising on your arms consistent with being forcibly restrained. He paused. There was also the matter of the water bottle. What about it? Ethan asked, leaning forward. You were severely dehydrated when we found you, yet there was a half-empty water bottle in the room. When we tested your blood, we found traces of a mild sedative, the kind that would make a teenager disoriented and compliant. Frank's eyes were steady on Ethan's face. Someone drugged you, took you to that building and locked you in. But your parents refused to pursue an investigation. They moved away less than a month later. Ethan felt as if the floor were tilting beneath him. His suspicions had been correct. It hadn't been an accident. It had been deliberate. But who and why? Russell Reynolds, he said, the name emerging from some deep recess of memory. Was he ever a suspect? Frank and Sarah exchanged a glance. He was, Frank confirmed. Russell had keys to most of Vernon's buildings. He was obsessed with preserving them, would regularly check on them. And there was the family connection. He hesitated. But we never had enough evidence to bring charges. Your parents were adamant about dropping the matter. There's something else you should know, Sarah interjected gently, something that wasn't in the official reports. Ethan looked at her questioningly. You weren't alone in that building, she said. When they found you, there were signs that someone else had been there with you. A child younger than you were. The water bottle, Ethan murmured, a memory surfacing. Someone passed it to me through a small opening between the walls. Frank nodded. Vernon Reynolds was known for building passageways between rooms, service corridors, hidden spaces. The mill building had several. We believe someone, a child, was using those passageways and found you. This person helped me survive, Ethan realized. Brought me water when I was dying of thirst. We never identified them, Frank said. By the time we thought to look, your parents had already shut down the investigation. But whoever it was might have saved your life. Ethan's mind was racing. The small hands in his fragmented memories belonged to a real person, someone who had helped him when he was trapped, possibly at great risk to themselves. I need to speak with Russell Reynolds, he said firmly. Frank frowned. That might not be wise. Russell is unstable, has been for years. He may have answers I need, Ethan insisted. About Vernon, about what happened to me, about this house I've purchased that seems connected to it all. Frank looked as if he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. I'll go with you. Russell knows me, might be more willing to talk if I'm there. But not today. He glanced at his watch. I have a commitment this afternoon. Tomorrow would be better. I'll come as well, Sarah offered. Russell used to frequent my catering business when I first started it. He always seemed to like me, or at least tolerate me. Ethan felt a surge of gratitude toward these virtual strangers who were willing to help him navigate his past. Thank you, he said simply. After Frank left, promising to return the next morning, Sarah busied herself with preparations for a catering job that evening. Ethan offered to help, finding an unexpected peace in the simple tasks of chopping vegetables and arranging appetizers on trays. You're good at that, Sarah observed, as he meticulously garnished a platter of smoked salmon. Most people aren't so precise. Ethan smiled slightly. I find repetitive tasks calming. They help me focus when my mind is racing. They worked in companionable silence for a while before Sarah spoke again. The girls are quite taken with you, you know, especially Lily. She's always been drawn to mysteries and puzzles. They're remarkable young women, Ethan said sincerely. Brave too. Not many teenagers would enter an abandoned house to help a stranger. They've had to be brave, Sarah said, her expression softening. Their parents, my brother and his wife, were in a serious car accident when the girls were 8. Thomas, my brother, suffered a traumatic brain injury. His wife, Catherine, was paralyzed from the waist down. They're in a specialized care facility in Boston now. She paused. The girls visit them monthly, but it's been hard. They've had to grow up quickly. You've done an amazing job with them, Ethan observed. Sarah smiled faintly. We manage. It hasn't always been easy financially, but we've made it work. She glanced at him. What about you, family? None to speak of, Ethan replied. My parents moved to Arizona after we left Millfield. I see them at Christmas, sometimes Thanksgiving. We're not close. He focused on arranging a sprig of dill. My father never approved of my career choices. He wanted me to join the family law firm. And instead you built a tech empire, Sarah remarked. I looked you up last night. Reynolds Security Systems. Very impressive, Ethan shrugged. I wanted to create something that made people feel safe. After what happened to me, security became important. The front door opened, followed by the sound of teenage voices and backpacks being dropped in the hallway. Moments later, Lily and Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway. Mr. Reynolds is still here. Lily exclaimed, clearly pleased. And he's helping with the Wilson wedding prep. It's Ethan, remember, he reminded her with a smile. And yes, your aunt has put me to work. Apparently I have a talent for garnish arrangement. Are you feeling better? Emma asked, her more reserved nature evident in her careful question. Much better, thank you. Your aunt has been very kind. Frank Morris came by, Sarah informed the twins as they raided the refrigerator for lunch ingredients. He's going to help Ethan talk to Russell Reynolds tomorrow. Lily's eyes widened. The creepy old guy who lives in that stone house on Maple? The one who yells at kids for walking on his lawn? That's him, Sarah confirmed. And he doesn't yell, Lily, he just expresses himself forcefully. He threatened to call the police when our debate team was selling cookies door to door last year, Emma recalled. Said we were disturbing the architectural harmony of the neighborhood. He's connected to what happened to me as a teenager, Ethan explained. I need to speak with him. Try to understand why I was locked in that mill building. The twins exchanged a look. We want to come too, Lily announced. Absolutely not, Sarah and Ethan responded simultaneously. But we're already involved, Lily protested. We rescued Mr. Reynolds, Ethan, from the attic. And we're researching Vernon Reynolds for our project anyway. This isn't a school project or an adventure, Sarah said firmly. Russell Reynolds is unstable, possibly dangerous. You two will stay here. Lily looked ready to argue further, but Emma placed a hand on her sister's arm, silently counseling restraint. After lunch, the twins disappeared upstairs to work on their school project, while Ethan helped Sarah load the catering supplies into her van. I should return to Hillcrest, he said as they closed the van's rear doors. I need to retrieve my car and some of my belongings. Sarah frowned. Are you sure that's wise? After what happened? I'll be careful, Ethan promised. I won't go near the attic. And I need my laptop and other essentials if I'm going to stay in Millfield longer than planned. Sarah still looked uncertain but nodded. Take my spare key so you can get back in. He'll be gone most of the evening with this catering job. Thank you, Ethan said, pocketing the key. For everything. Sarah studied him for a moment. You know, when I recognized you yesterday, I almost didn't say anything. Millfield is good at keeping secrets, at pretending the past doesn't exist, but some secrets fester if they're buried too long. She squeezed his arm gently. Be careful, Ethan. Whatever happened 25 years ago, someone went to great lengths to keep it hidden. After Sarah left for her catering job, Ethan borrowed her bicycle to return to Hillcrest Manor. The ride gave him time to think, to process the revelations of the morning. Someone had deliberately locked him in that mill building as a teenager. Someone else, a child, had helped him survive. And all of it somehow connected to Vernon Reynolds and his architectural legacy. As Hillcrest Manor came into view, Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Yesterday he had seen it as merely an old house in need of renovation. Now it felt like a piece in a larger puzzle, one that he was only beginning to understand. He parked the bicycle by his Bentley and entered through the front door, which he'd left unlocked in his haste to leave with the Carters the previous evening. Inside, the house was quiet, dust particles dancing in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the windows. Ethan moved efficiently, gathering his laptop, phone charger and additional clothing from the bedroom. He deliberately avoided looking toward the attic stairs at the end of the hallway. As he was about to leave, a sound caught his attention, a soft thud from somewhere in the house. Ethan froze, listening. It could be just the house settling, an old building making the noises old buildings make. Then it came again, distinct, deliberate, the sound of a door closing. Someone else was in the house. Ethan stood motionless in the upstairs hallway, his senses heightened. The sound had come from downstairs, perhaps from the direction of the kitchen. He considered his options. The sensible choice would be to leave immediately, avoid any confrontation. But curiosity and a growing determination to uncover the truth about his past propelled him forward. He moved quietly down the stairs, placing each foot carefully to avoid the creaking steps. At the bottom, he paused again, listening. The house had fallen silent, but Ethan could feel a presence, that inexplicable awareness that he wasn't alone. "Hello?" he called, deciding that direct confrontation was better than this unnerving silence. "Is someone there?" No response. Ethan moved toward the kitchen where he'd heard the sound. The room appeared empty at first glance, the same water bottles scattered across the countertop, the same afternoon light filtering through dusty windows. Then he noticed something new, a folded piece of paper placed prominently on the kitchen table. He approached cautiously and unfolded the note. Written in neat, precise handwriting were the words, "Leave Hillcrest. Leave Millfield. The past should stay buried." A chill ran through Ethan. The note confirmed his suspicions. Someone didn't want him investigating his past. Someone who had access to this house, who perhaps knew about the newspapers in the attic, who might even have been responsible for the door jamming and trapping him. The sound of a car starting outside pulled him from these thoughts. Ethan rushed to the window in time to see an older model sedan pulling away from the house, moving too quickly for him to make out the license plate or the driver. With a growing sense of unease, Ethan gathered his belongings and left the house, locking the door behind him. The note he carefully placed in his pocket, evidence that his presence in Millfield had not gone unnoticed. The ride back to the Carter home was tense, Ethan constantly checking over his shoulder for signs of the sedan. By the time he arrived, the twins were sitting on the front porch engrossed in their laptops. "You're back," Lily exclaimed, looking up. "Did you get what you needed from Hillcrest?" "And more," Ethan replied cryptically, parking the bicycle. "Is your aunt still at her catering job?" Emma nodded. "She won't be back until late. We were just researching Vernon Reynolds for our project." She hesitated. "Actually, we found something interesting you might want to see." Ethan followed the girls into the house, his curiosity piqued. In the living room, Lily opened her laptop and pulled up a scan of an old architectural journal. "This is from 1928, she explained. "It's an interview with Vernon Reynolds about his design philosophy. Listen to this part," she read aloud. "Architecture should challenge the inhabitant, not merely shelter them. I design spaces that require engagement, that force confrontation with one's surroundings. My most successful buildings are those where inhabitants must solve the building itself, navigate its complexities, discover its secrets. This is why I incorporate what some call puzzling elements, rooms that connect in unexpected ways, passages that appear when needed, spaces that reveal themselves only to the observant." He designed buildings as puzzles. Ethan murmured, the implications sinking in. "There's more," Emma said, turning her own laptop toward him. "We found records of a private journal Vernon kept, mentioned in several academic papers about his work. According to these sources, Vernon designed certain buildings with what he called test spaces, rooms designed to elicit specific psychological responses." "What kind of responses?" Ethan asked, though he suspected he already knew. "Mostly related to problem-solving under duress," Lily answered. "The papers are vague about details, but they mention that Vernon believed in architectural trials that would reveal a person's true character." "Trials," Ethan repeated, the word sending another chill through him. "Like locking someone in a confined space to see how they react." The twins exchanged a look. "That's what we were thinking," Emma admitted. "But here's where it gets really interesting. Vernon's journal apparently contained detailed notes about which family members he had subjected to these trials and how they performed." "Family members?" Ethan's voice rose sharply. "He experimented on his own family?" "According to these academic sources, yes," Lily confirmed. "But the actual journal has been missing for decades. The last person known to have possession of it was Russell Reynolds," Ethan guessed. Emma nodded. "How did you know?" "It fits the pattern," Ethan said grimly. "Russell was obsessed with preserving Vernon's architectural legacy. He would have wanted to protect the journal as well." Lily closed her laptop. "Do you think what happened to you, both as a teenager and yesterday in the attic, might have been some kind of architectural trial inspired by Vernon's ideas?" Before Ethan could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar local number. He answered cautiously. "Mr. Reynolds." The voice was unfamiliar, elderly but strong. "This is Russell Reynolds. I understand you've been asking about me." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. "How did you get this number?" "Millfield is a small town, Mr. Reynolds. Information flows freely to those who know how to listen." A pause. "I hear you purchased Hillcrest Manor. An interesting choice given your history with Vernon's buildings." "That's what I'd like to discuss with you," Ethan replied, keeping his voice steady. "Our shared family history. Vernon's designs. What happened to me in the mill building." Another pause, longer this time. "Perhaps we should meet. There are things you should understand about your family's legacy. Things that can't be explained over the phone." "When and where?" Ethan asked, ignoring the twins' wide-eyed stares. "My home. Tomorrow morning, 11 o'clock. Come alone." "I'd prefer to bring Detective Morris with me," Ethan countered, remembering Frank's warning about Russell's instability. A dry chuckle came through the line. "Frank Morris has his own biases, but very well, bring him if it makes you comfortable." 11 o'clock. "Don't be late." The line went dead. Ethan lowered the phone slowly. "That was Russell Reynolds. He wants to meet tomorrow." "You're not actually going, are you?" Emma asked, concern evident in her voice. "I have to," Ethan replied. "He may have answers I need. About Vernon, about what happened to me." But what if he's dangerous? Lily pressed. What if he's the one who left that note at Hillcrest? Ethan had been so absorbed in the call that he'd forgotten to mention the note. He pulled it from his pocket and showed it to the twins. Someone was in the house when I went back. They left this. The girls examined the note, their expressions growing more serious. The past should stay buried, Emma read aloud. That's definitely a threat. All the more reason to speak with Russell, Ethan said. Detective Morris will be with me. I'll be safe. The front door opened and all three turned to see Sarah entering, looking tired but satisfied after her catering job. Successful evening? Ethan asked, quickly pocketing the note before she could see it. Very, Sarah confirmed, setting down her purse. The Wilsons were pleased and I got 2 more bookings from guests at the wedding. She studied their faces. Why do you all look so serious? Did something happen? Before Ethan could formulate a response, Lily jumped in. We found information about Vernon Reynolds' architectural theories. He designed buildings as psychological tests and experimented on his own family members. Sarah's expression shifted from tired to concerned. That sounds disturbing, and unfortunately not surprising given what happened to Ethan. There's more, Emma added. Russell Reynolds called. He wants to meet with Ethan tomorrow. Sarah looked sharply at Ethan. And you agreed? Frank Morris will accompany me, Ethan assured her. I'll be careful. Sarah shook her head, a gesture of concern rather than disapproval. Russell Reynolds has always been eccentric, but in recent years there have been rumors that he's become increasingly paranoid. People say he rarely leaves his house now, that he's convinced the town is conspiring to destroy Vernon's architectural legacy. All the more reason to approach him carefully, Ethan acknowledged. But I need to speak with him. He may be the only person who understands the connection between Vernon's designs and what happened to me. Sarah seemed about to argue further, but instead sighed. Just promise me you'll be cautious, and that you'll have Frank with you the entire time. I promise, Ethan said sincerely. After Sarah went upstairs to shower and change, the twins pulled Ethan back into their research, showing him old photographs of Vernon Reynolds' buildings and pointing out the architectural elements that appeared consistently across his designs. Narrow passageways, hidden rooms, unconventional layouts that forced inhabitants to navigate spaces in specific ways. It's like he was creating psychological mazes, Ethan observed, studying a floor plan of one of Vernon's commercial buildings. Places that disorient and challenge. Look at this, Emma said, pointing to a detail in the corner of the floor plan. This symbol appears in all his designs. It's like a signature. Ethan leaned closer. The symbol was simple but distinctive. A triangle with a circle inside it, bisected by a vertical line. Something about it triggered a memory, a fleeting image of the same symbol carved into wood. I've seen this before, he said slowly. In the mill building where I was trapped. It was carved into the door of the room. The twins exchanged a significant look. It's in Hillcrest too, Lily revealed. We saw it on the attic door, the one that was stuck. The implications hung in the air between them. Vernon Reynolds had marked the spaces he designated for his trials. The room where Ethan had been trapped as a teenager and the attic room at Hillcrest both bore this mark. There's something else, Emma said hesitantly. While you were getting your things from Hillcrest, we found a mention of Vernon's journal being divided into sections for different family members. One section was labeled ER Third Generation Trial. ER, Ethan repeated. Ethan Reynolds. But that's impossible, Lily objected. Vernon died in 1959. You weren't even born yet. No, Ethan said slowly, the pieces beginning to align in his mind. But Vernon could have created a system, a methodology for these trials that continued after his death. A tradition that Russell might have carried on. The theory was disturbing, but made a certain perverse sense. If Vernon had indeed designed psychological tests for family members and documented the results, someone like Russell, obsessed with preserving Vernon's legacy, might have continued the practice. We need to see Vernon's journal, Ethan decided. If Russell has it, we need to convince him to share it. Or find it ourselves, Lily suggested, her expression brightening with the thrill of investigation. Lily, Emma cautioned, we can't just break into Russell Reynolds' house looking for a journal. No one's breaking into anywhere, Ethan said firmly. I'll speak with Russell tomorrow with Detective Morris present. If the journal exists and contains information about what happened to me, I'll find a way to access it legally. That evening after dinner, Ethan sat on the guest room bed, reviewing the information the twins had uncovered. The pieces were starting to form a pattern. Vernon's architectural trials, Russell's obsession with preserving that legacy, Ethan's own experiences in two different Reynolds-designed buildings. But there were still missing elements. Who had helped him survive in the mill building by passing water through the wall? Why had his parents so adamantly refused to investigate what happened? And who had left the threatening note at Hillcrest? Ethan's phone chimed with a text message from Frank Morris. Confirmed for tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. We'll pick you up at the Carter house. Be prepared. Russell can be difficult. Another chime followed almost immediately. This one from his assistant in New York. Contractors confirmed for Monday at Hillcrest Manor. Architect requesting final approval on attic renovation plans. Please advise. The mundane business message seemed almost comical in contrast to the mysteries Ethan was unraveling. He quickly responded to his assistant, instructing her to delay the renovations by 2 weeks. He needed more time in Millfield, more time to understand what had happened to him and why. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Sarah holding a cup of tea. "Thought you might want this," she said, offering the cup. "Helps with sleep." "Thank you," Ethan said, accepting it gratefully. "I could use some good sleep before tomorrow's meeting." Sarah lingered in the doorway. "The girls told me about Vernon Reynolds' architectural trials, about the symbol on the doors where you were trapped." Ethan nodded. "It seems Vernon had some unusual ideas about testing family members through architecture. Ideas that Russell may have continued. It's twisted," Sarah said bluntly. "Using buildings to traumatize people, especially family members." "I'm hoping Russell can explain the purpose behind it," Ethan replied. "If it was some misguided family tradition, or something more sinister." Sarah studied him for a moment. "You know, when the girls first told me they'd found you trapped in Hillcrest's attic, I had the strangest feeling of déjà vu. Not about you specifically, but about the situation." She hesitated. "My brother, the girl's father, used to talk about a friend he had in high school who disappeared for several days and was found in an abandoned building. I wonder now if he was talking about you." Ethan felt a jolt of recognition. "Thomas Carter. Was that your brother's name?" Sarah nodded. "Yes, he was a few years older than you, I believe." A memory surfaced. A tall, friendly teenager who had sometimes included Ethan in games, despite their age difference. "I remember him," Ethan said softly. "He was kind to me. One of the few older kids who was." "That sounds like Thomas," Sarah said with a sad smile. "Always looking out for the younger ones." She straightened, her expression becoming more businesslike. "Get some rest, Ethan. Tomorrow will be challenging, I expect." After Sarah left, Ethan sipped the tea, his mind turning over this new connection. Thomas Carter had been at Millfield High when Ethan disappeared. Could he have known something about what happened? Had he shared that knowledge with his daughters? The coincidences were piling up, becoming too numerous to dismiss. The Carter twins rescuing him from Hillcrest's attic seemed less like chance and more like some cosmic symmetry, a pattern repeating across time. As Ethan finally drifted towards sleep, one question persisted. Was history simply repeating itself, or was someone deliberately recreating the events of 25 years ago? And if so, to what end? Outside, a light rain began to fall, tapping gently against the window. In the darkness of the guest room, Ethan Reynolds dreamed of narrow spaces, hidden doorways and a triangle with a circle inside it, bisected by a line, the mark of Vernon Reynolds' architectural trials that had somehow, across decades, claimed him as their subject. Cedar Grove Assisted Living was a sprawling one-story building on the north side of Millfield, its brick exterior partially obscured by well-tended gardens and mature trees. Ethan arrived in a taxi, having called for one as soon as he left Russell's property. The 20-minute ride had felt interminable, his anxiety mounting with each passing minute. He tried Sarah's phone twice more during the journey, but both calls went to voicemail. Logic told him there was likely a benign explanation. Perhaps Cedar Grove had a policy against cell phones. Or maybe Sarah had simply turned hers off during their visit with Sullivan. Yet Russell's cryptic warning about Howard being unpredictable and committed to Vernon's legacy, had triggered Ethan's protective instincts. The taxi had barely stopped when Ethan jumped out, hastily paying the driver before hurrying toward the main entrance. The lobby of Cedar Grove was bright and cheerful, with comfortable seating areas and large windows overlooking an interior courtyard. A receptionist looked up as Ethan approached, her practiced smile suggesting she was accustomed to anxious visitors. "May I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for some visitors who came to see Howard Sullivan," Ethan explained, trying to keep his voice calm and professional. "A woman and 2 teenage girls, Sarah Carter and her nieces." The receptionist consulted her computer. "Yes, they signed in about an hour ago. Mr. Sullivan is in the East Wing, room 137. "Thank you," Ethan said, already moving toward the corridor she had indicated. "I'll just join them, if that's all right." "Of course. Visitors are always welcome at Cedar Grove," she called after him. But Ethan was already halfway down the hall, following signs toward the East Wing. The facility was clean and well-maintained, with none of the institutional atmosphere he had half expected. Residents moved through the hallways or sat in small lounges, some chatting with visitors, others engaged in various activities. Under different circumstances, Ethan might have appreciated the dignified environment Cedar Grove provided for its elderly residents. Now he barely registered his surroundings, focused solely on finding Sarah and the twins. Room 137 had a small nameplate beside the door, Howard Sullivan. The door stood partially open, and as Ethan approached, he heard voices from within. Sarah's measured tones, one of the twins asking a question, and an elderly man's response. The words indistinct, but the voice surprisingly strong for someone in his 90s. Ethan paused outside the door, relief washing over him. They were fine. His anxiety had been unwarranted. Russell's warning perhaps an attempt to disturb him, or distract him from pursuing further information. He was about to knock when Howard Sullivan's voice became clearer, the words stopping Ethan cold. "Vernon's trials were necessary, you see. Architecture isn't just about buildings, it's about shaping human experience, human consciousness. The trials were designed to identify those with the sensitivity to perceive architecture's deeper purpose." "But locking people in confined spaces against their will," came Sarah's voice, tense with controlled anger. "How could that ever be justified?" "You're applying conventional morality to visionary methodology," Sullivan replied, echoing Russell's words so precisely that Ethan felt a chill of recognition. Vernon understood that transformation requires discomfort, that growth emerges from challenge. "That's what Russell says too," Lily's voice now, "but it sounds like excuses for cruelty." A dry chuckle from Sullivan. "Russell is a competent caretaker of Vernon's legacy, but he never fully understood the deeper purpose. He maintains the form without comprehending the essence." "What deeper purpose?" Emma asked, her tone careful, probing. Vernon believed that architecture could transcend physical limitations, that certain spatial configurations could alter human consciousness itself, Sullivan explained, his voice taking on the quality of a lecturer. The trials weren't merely tests of resilience or sensitivity. They were attempts to induce specific psychological states, to prepare subjects for architectural enlightenment. Enlightenment through trauma. Sarah's skepticism was evident. Transformation through controlled crisis, Sullivan corrected. Vernon discovered that certain spatial experiences, under specific conditions of isolation and sensory limitation, could trigger what he called architectural awakening, a heightened state of spatial awareness that bordered on the extrasensory. Ethan felt as if the floor were tilting beneath him. This went beyond Russell's explanation of architectural sensitivity into something more disturbing, more cult-like in its implications. "And you helped design these trial spaces?" Lily asked. "I refined Vernon's concepts, yes," Sullivan acknowledged, pride evident in his voice. "Vernon had the vision, but I developed the practical applications, the precise dimensions that induced claustrophobic response without panic, the subtle geometric asymmetries that disorient without causing nausea, the lighting conditions that alter perception of time." "You designed psychological torture chambers," Sarah said flatly. "I designed transformational spaces," Sullivan countered. Each trial room was calibrated to the subject's psychological profile, their specific fears and resistances. "Your young friend Ethan, for instance, His trial space in the mill building was designed to address his particular psychological barriers, his resistance to embracing his architectural inheritance. Ethan had heard enough. He pushed the door open and stepped into the room. "And did my trial space work as designed, Mr. Sullivan?" he asked, his voice steady despite the anger coursing through him. Howard Sullivan sat in an armchair by the window, thin and frail-looking in a cardigan sweater, but with alert eyes that showed no sign of the confusion Russell had mentioned. Sarah and the twins turned at Ethan's entrance, surprise and relief crossing their faces. "Ethan," Sullivan said, studying him with obvious interest, "after all these years, I wondered if you might find your way back to Millfield eventually." He gestured to a vacant chair. "Please, join us. We were just discussing Vernon's methodology." "I heard," Ethan replied, remaining standing. "You were explaining how you designed spaces specifically to traumatize people for their own enlightenment." Sullivan sighed. "Your perspective is understandably colored by your experience. But consider the results. You emerged from your trial with enhanced spatial awareness, with architectural sensitivity that later translated into innovative security system designs. Vernon's methodology worked exactly as intended in your case." "I succeeded despite what was done to me, not because of it," Ethan countered. "And nothing, no architectural awakening or enhanced sensitivity, could justify subjecting a 15-year-old to that kind of experience." "Yet here you are," Sullivan observed, a slight smile playing at his lips, "drawn back to Millfield, to Hillcrest Manor, another of Vernon's trial buildings, back to the source of your transformation. Doesn't that suggest that some part of you recognized the value of what occurred, sought to reconnect with that experience?" "I came back to understand what happened to me," Ethan said firmly. "To confront my trauma, not to celebrate it." "Understanding is the first step toward acceptance," Sullivan replied, unperturbed. "You may reject Vernon's methods now, but you cannot deny their effectiveness. Your company, Reynolds Security Systems, applies principles of architectural psychology that echo Vernon's insights. Spaces designed to influence behavior, to create specific emotional responses, to guide movement through subtle environmental cues." Sarah stood, placing herself between Sullivan and the twins in a protective gesture that did not go unnoticed by Ethan. "We should go," she said. "We've learned what we came to find out." Sullivan's gaze shifted to her, his expression softening. "Sarah Carter, you've grown into a remarkable woman. I remember you as a child, visiting Russell that summer. You were always curious, always exploring. Vernon would have seen potential in you, I think." "I'm grateful I was spared his attention," Sarah replied coldly. "Yet you intervened in young Ethan's trial," Sullivan noted. "Found him through the passages I designed, brought him water when the protocol specified isolation. That took courage and architectural sensitivity of your own. Navigating spaces few would even notice, understanding intuitively how the building was constructed." "It took basic human decency," Sarah corrected, "something Vernon's methodology seems to have lacked entirely." Sullivan shrugged, unbothered by her criticism. Conventional morality is often at odds with visionary insight. Vernon understood this, accepted the disapproval of the uninitiated as the price of innovation. "Did you leave the note at Hillcrest?" Ethan asked abruptly. "The warning to leave Millfield, to let the past stay buried?" Sullivan's eyebrows rose in what appeared to be genuine surprise. "A note? No, I rarely leave Cedar Grove these days. My architectural explorations are primarily theoretical now." He studied Ethan with renewed interest. "Someone warned you away." "How intriguing! Perhaps Vernon's legacy has more active caretakers than I realized." "Russell mentioned you might be confused some days," Ethan said carefully, "having memory issues." A sharp laugh escaped Sullivan. "Russell finds it convenient to characterize me as declining mentally. It allows him to position himself as the primary authority on Vernon's work." He tapped his temple. "My mind remains quite intact, especially regarding Vernon's architectural theories. If anything, age has brought greater clarity, greater understanding of what Vernon was attempting to achieve." "And what was that exactly?" Ethan pressed, sensing that Sullivan might reveal more than Russell had been willing to. "Nothing less than the transformation of human consciousness through architectural experience," Sullivan replied, his eyes brightening with enthusiasm. Vernon believed that specific spatial configurations, experienced under controlled conditions, could alter neural pathways, creating new modes of perception and understanding. The trials were merely the first phase of a more ambitious program. What program? Lily asked, unable to contain her curiosity despite Sarah's protective stance. Sullivan smiled at her, seeming pleased by her interest. Vernon designed a sequence of architectural experiences, each building on the previous, culminating in what he called the ultimate space, a room designed to induce a permanent state of heightened architectural awareness, a kind of perpetual enlightenment. That sounds like brainwashing, Emma observed bluntly. A crude characterization, but not entirely inaccurate, Sullivan acknowledged. Vernon saw it as neural reprogramming through spatial experience, using architecture to reshape consciousness itself. Did he create this ultimate space? Ethan asked, disturbed by the implications yet needing to understand the full extent of Vernon's delusions. He designed it, Sullivan confirmed, but never built it. The plans exist only in his private papers, which Russell guards jealously. A shadow crossed his aged face. Vernon died before he could implement the final phase of his work. Her great loss to architectural innovation. A fortunate escape for potential victims, Sarah countered. Sullivan waved a dismissive hand. Victims, subjects, initiates, terminology changes nothing about the fundamental value of Vernon's insights. Architecture shapes human experience more profoundly than most realize. Vernon simply made that influence explicit, intentional. Did you know about the trap mechanism in Hillcrest's attic? Ethan asked. The one that nearly killed me a few days ago. Sullivan nodded. I designed it myself, based on Vernon's specifications. A self-activating door mechanism triggered by pressure on specific floor sections. He frowned slightly. Though it should have been deactivated decades ago, when the house was sold outside the family. Russell was supposed to ensure that all trial spaces were rendered safe when Reynolds' properties changed hands. Well, he didn't, Ethan said grimly. The mechanism was still very much functional when I stepped into that attic room. Interesting, Sullivan murmured, more to himself than to his visitors. Russell has always been meticulous about maintaining Vernon's buildings according to protocol. An oversight seems uncharacteristic. Unless it wasn't an oversight, Sarah suggested. Unless someone deliberately ensured the mechanism remained active, knowing Ethan had purchased the house. Sullivan's gaze sharpened. An intriguing theory. It would require specific knowledge of Vernon's systems, access to Hillcrest before Ethan's arrival, and a motive for wanting him to experience another trial. Russell has the knowledge and could have accessed the house before I moved in, Ethan pointed out. And he believes in Vernon's methodology, in the value of these trials. Russell maintains Vernon's legacy, yes, Sullivan agreed, but he follows protocols precisely. Reactivating a trial mechanism without documentation, without supervision, that would be a significant deviation from Vernon's methodology. Then who? Sarah pressed. Who else would have both the knowledge and the motivation? Sullivan's expression became thoughtful. Knowledge of Vernon's systems is limited to a small circle. Myself, Russell, perhaps a few others who studied Vernon's work closely. As for motivation, he looked directly at Ethan. Who benefits from your continued connection to Vernon's architectural legacy? Who might want to ensure you remain engaged with your Reynolds inheritance? A chilling possibility formed in Ethan's mind. My father, he said quietly. James Reynolds. Sullivan nodded slowly. James was always deeply invested in Vernon's work, in maintaining the family tradition. He personally oversaw your trial at the mill building, monitored your responses, documented your progress according to Vernon's criteria. But he's in Arizona, Sarah objected. He hasn't been back to Millfield in decades, according to Russell. Russell doesn't know everything, Sullivan replied. James visited me here at Cedar Grove 6 months ago. He was interested in Vernon's trial spaces, in which ones remained active in Millfield. The revelation hit Ethan like a physical blow. His father had been in Millfield recently, had specifically inquired about Vernon's trial spaces. The timing aligned perfectly with Ethan's decision to purchase property in town, suggesting James had somehow known about Ethan's plans to return. He asked about Hillcrest specifically, Sullivan continued, confirming Ethan's suspicions. Wanted to know if the attic mechanism was still functional, if the observation systems were still in place. Observation systems, Sarah echoed, alarmed. Vernon built monitoring capabilities into all his trial spaces, Sullivan explained. Hidden cameras, one-way viewing panels, audio recording systems. The trials were meant to be documented, after all. Ethan felt physically ill. Are you saying someone could have been watching me in that attic? Recording my experience? Sullivan nodded. If the observation systems were still active, yes. The control point for Hillcrest would be in the east wall of the basement, a hidden room accessible through what appears to be a storage closet. We need to go, Ethan said urgently, turning to Sarah and the twins. Now, Sullivan watched them with interest. You're going to check the observation room at Hillcrest, he surmised. A wise decision. If someone has been monitoring you, evidence might remain. Thank you for your candor, Mr. Sullivan, Ethan said stiffly. One moment, Ethan, Sullivan called as they turned to leave. There's something you should know about Vernon's journals. The one Russell showed you isn't the complete record. Ethan paused. What do you mean? Vernon maintained 2 sets of journals, Sullivan explained. The official record that Russell preserves so carefully, and a second, more personal set, documenting his private thoughts, his true ambitions for the architectural trials. The second journal would help you understand the full scope of what Vernon intended. And where is this second journal? Ethan asked. A sly smile crossed Sullivan's weathered face. The last I knew, it was hidden at Hillcrest Manor, in a compartment beneath the gazebo floor. Vernon believed in embedding his most important insights into the architecture itself. The gazebo, Ethan repeated, remembering the dilapidated structure he had noticed on his first day at Hillcrest. How something about it had nagged at his memory. Vernon designed it specifically to house his private records, Sullivan confirmed. Their fitting repository, architecture containing the blueprint for architectural enlightenment. Thank you, Ethan said again, with more sincerity this time, for telling us the truth. The truth is essential to understanding, Sullivan replied, and understanding is essential to transformation. His alert eyes moved from Ethan to the twins, lingering on them with disconcerting intensity. These young women remind me of you at their age, Ethan. Curious, perceptive, sensitive to spatial nuances. Vernon would have seen potential in them. Sarah immediately stepped between Sullivan and her nieces, her posture protective. Stay away from my girls, she said, her voice low and dangerous. Sullivan raised his hands in a placating gesture. Merely an observation, Miss Carter. The trials ended with Vernon's generation. Russell maintains the records, but the active implementation of the methodology ceased decades ago. He smiled faintly. Though some might wish to revive it, to continue Vernon's great work. That will never happen, Ethan said firmly. Vernon's great work was abuse disguised as architecture, trauma masquerading as enlightenment. It ends now. They left Sullivan's room quickly after that, Ethan ushering Sarah and the twins through Cedar Grove's cheerful hallways with barely concealed urgency. Only when they reached Sarah's car in the parking lot did they pause to breathe, to process what they had learned. Do you think he was telling the truth? Lily asked, her usual enthusiasm dampened by Sullivan's disturbing revelations. About your father visiting him? About the observation room at Hillcrest? I think so, Ethan replied grimly. Sullivan seemed proud of his role in Vernon's work, eager to share his knowledge. I don't think he was lying. Then your father might have been watching you in that attic, Emma said, her logical mind connecting the implications. Might have reactivated the trap mechanism, specifically to subject you to another trial, and might be the one who left that threatening note, Sarah added. Warning you away when you began investigating the past, connecting with us. We need to check the observation room, Ethan decided. And the gazebo. If Sullivan is right, if there's evidence my father has been involved, has been monitoring me, we'll need help, Sarah said firmly. I'm calling Frank Morris. She pulled out her phone, which showed several missed calls from Ethan. You tried to reach me? Russell warned me that Sullivan might be dangerous, Ethan explained. I was worried about you and the girls. Sarah's expression softened. We were fine. Sullivan is disturbing, but physically harmless at his age, and Cedar Grove has staff everywhere. She dialed Frank's number, briefly explaining the situation and requesting his presence at Hillcrest Manor. He'll meet us there in 20 minutes, she reported. After ending the call, the drive to Hillcrest passed in tense silence, each of them processing Sullivan's revelations in their own way. Ethan found his mind returning to the gazebo, to Sullivan's claim about Vernon's private journal being hidden there. If true, it might contain insights into Vernon's true motivations, into the full extent of the trial methodology that had shaped Ethan's life. Frank Morris was waiting in his pickup truck when they arrived at Hillcrest, his weathered face serious as they approached. "Got here as quick as I could," he said by way of greeting. "Sarah mentioned something about an observation room in the basement." Ethan nodded. According to Sullivan, Vernon built monitoring systems into his trial spaces. The control point for Hillcrest should be behind a false wall in the basement's east side. "And you think someone, possibly your father, has been using it recently?" Frank clarified. "Sullivan said my father visited him 6 months ago, asking specifically about Hillcrest's systems," Ethan confirmed. "The timing aligns with my decision to return to Millfield, to purchase property here." Frank's expression darkened. "If James has been back in town, monitoring you without your knowledge, that crosses several legal boundaries. Invasion of privacy at minimum. Let's find out what's down there before we decide on next steps," Ethan suggested, leading the group toward the house. The basement of Hillcrest Manor was damp and musty, filled with the accumulated debris of decades, old furniture, discarded appliances, cardboard boxes of forgotten belongings. The east wall, as Sullivan had indicated, contained what appeared to be a storage closet with a heavy wooden door. "This looks promising," Frank commented, examining the door. "Solid oak, newer than the surrounding architecture. A replacement, perhaps? Or a disguise," Ethan suggested. He pulled the door open, revealing what initially appeared to be a simple closet filled with cleaning supplies and old paint cans. "Sullivan said there's a hidden room behind this." Frank ran his hands along the back wall of the closet, pressing methodically in different locations. False walls usually have a release mechanism, a pressure point or hidden latch. After several minutes of searching, Emma spoke up from where she had been examining the floor. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a slight discoloration in the wooden boards. "This section of flooring is newer than the rest. And there's a small indentation here, see?" Frank knelt beside her, examining the spot she indicated. "Good eye, Emma. This could be our access point." He pressed firmly on the discolored board, which gave slightly under pressure. A soft click came from the back wall of the closet, and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a dark space beyond. Ethan's heart raced as Frank illuminated the hidden room with his phone's flashlight. The space was small, perhaps 6 feet square, and contained a desk with monitoring equipment that looked decades old, analog recording devices, switchboards, and a bank of small black and white monitors. Most significant, however, was the evidence of recent use. A modern laptop computer sitting amid the vintage equipment, connected to the older systems through a series of adapters. "Someone has updated the monitoring capabilities," Frank observed, carefully entering the room. "Bridged the gap between Vernon's original systems and current technology." "Is it active?" Sarah asked, peering over his shoulder. Frank examined the equipment. "The power is on, and this recording unit appears to be functioning." He gestured to a digital video recorder connected to the laptop. This setup could capture footage from cameras throughout the house, storing it locally and potentially uploading it remotely. Ethan felt a profound violation, knowing that someone, likely his own father, had been secretly monitoring his movements in Hillcrest. "Can you tell if it's been accessed recently?" Frank checked the laptop, which was password protected but displayed a login timestamp on the lock screen. "Last login was 3 days ago, according to this, right around the time you were trapped in the attic." "So someone was watching," Lily said, her voice small with the realization. "Someone saw Ethan trapped up there and didn't help. Or someone caused him to be trapped and observed the results," Sarah added grimly. Frank continued examining the room, his former detective's instincts evident in his methodical approach. "There's something else here," he said, opening a drawer in the desk. He carefully removed a leather-bound notebook and several USB drives labeled with dates. "Documentation and digital recordings." The notebook contained handwritten entries in a precise, architectural hand that Ethan recognized from the journal Russell had shown him. Vernon's handwriting, continuing in this hidden room decades after his death. But the later entries were in a different hand, one that sent a chill through Ethan. He recognized his father's handwriting from years of terse birthday cards and formal notes. The most recent entry was dated just 4 days earlier. Subject has returned to Hillcrest as anticipated. Attic trial mechanism activated and confirmed functional. Observation systems updated and remote monitoring established. Phase 2 of third-generation integration protocol prepared for implementation. Vernon's vision continues. My father, Ethan said quietly, showing the entry to the others. He's been here in this house watching me, planning some Phase 2 of Vernon's protocols. This is evidence of criminal activity, Frank said firmly. Invasion of privacy, illegal surveillance, potentially false imprisonment, if he deliberately trapped you in that attic. He carefully placed the notebook in a plastic bag he retrieved from his pocket. We should contact the Millfield Police Department, file a formal report. Not yet, Ethan said, surprising the others. There's one more place we need to check first. Sullivan mentioned Vernon's private journal might be hidden in the gazebo out back. Frank looked skeptical, but nodded. Lead the way. The gazebo stood in the overgrown garden behind Hillcrest, its white paint peeling and several boards rotting from exposure to the elements. Yet its basic structure remained sound, a testament to Vernon's architectural skill. Ethan approached it cautiously, feeling as if he were completing a circle begun decades ago. Sullivan said there's a compartment beneath the floor, he explained, stepping carefully onto the gazebo's wooden planks. Something about Vernon embedding his insights into the architecture itself. The center of the gazebo floor featured a circular inlay, a decorative element that might have appeared purely aesthetic to casual observation. But Ethan, studying it with new understanding, recognized Vernon's symbol worked into the pattern, the triangle circle line that had marked his buildings, his trial spaces, and even Ethan himself on the family diagram. Here, he said, kneeling beside the inlay. This is Vernon's mark. Frank joined him, examining the wooden inlay. The centerpiece looks like it might rotate, he observed, tracing the circular element with his finger. Try turning it clockwise. Ethan did so, meeting resistance at first, then feeling the mechanism give way as decades of disuse yielded to persistent pressure. The circular piece turned 90 degrees, then clicked into place. A section of the gazebo floor, about 2 feet square, lifted slightly, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Inside lay a leather-bound volume, similar to the one Russell had shown him, but smaller, more worn. Beside it was a sealed envelope with ER written on it in fading ink. ER, Sarah read over his shoulder. Ethan Reynolds. How could Vernon have left something for you decades before you were born? Not just for me, Ethan realized. For any Reynolds with those initials who found their way to this place. Vernon was planning for future generations, setting puzzles that only those with architectural sensitivity would solve. He carefully removed the journal and envelope from the compartment. The journal's cover bore no title, no symbol, just years of wear that had softened its leather binding. The envelope was sealed with wax impressed with Vernon's triangle circle line mark. Should we open these here? Sarah asked, glancing at the darkening sky. Evening was approaching, and with it a sense of unease about remaining at Hillcrest as night fell. No, Ethan decided. Let's take them back to your place. I want to examine them carefully, and I'd rather not do it here, where my father might return at any moment. They secured the gazebo compartment and returned to Sarah's car, the journal and envelope carefully stowed in Ethan's bag. Frank followed them back to the Carter house in his pickup truck, the notebook from the observation room safely in his possession. At Sarah's kitchen table, with mugs of hot tea to ward off the evening chill, Ethan finally opened Vernon's private journal. The first entry was dated 1937, the handwriting more personal, less formal than in the official journal Russell maintained. Architecture must be more than shelter, more than aesthetic pleasure. It must transform consciousness itself. My buildings will be instruments of awakening, tools to access heightened states of perception. The trials are not mere tests but initiations, passages from ordinary awareness to architectural enlightenment. My family will be the first to experience this transformation, to transcend the limitations of conventional spatial perception. Ethan read selected passages aloud, the group falling silent as Vernon's true ambitions became clear. The architect had not merely been testing family members for some inherited sensitivity, He had been attempting to fundamentally alter human consciousness through controlled architectural experiences. The trials were designed as progressive initiations into what Vernon called spatial enlightenment, each more intensive than the last. He was creating a cult, Frank said bluntly after Ethan had read several entries, using architecture as his medium, his own family as his subjects. And my father has continued his work, Ethan added grimly, turning to the last written page of the journal. There, in his father's handwriting, was an entry dated just 2 months earlier. Preparations complete for E's return to Millfield. Hillcrest acquired through third-party channels as planned. Observation systems updated. Trial spaces reactivated. Vernon's ultimate space designs reviewed and construction specifications finalized. The third-generation protocol will reach its culmination at last. Ultimate space, Sarah repeated. Sullivan mentioned that Vernon's final design meant to permanently alter consciousness. And my father has the plans, Ethan realized, has been preparing to implement them. With hands that trembled slightly, he opened the sealed envelope addressed to ER. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age, containing a message written in Vernon's precise hand. To the Reynolds who finds this message, your presence here confirms what I have long theorized, that architectural sensitivity transcends conventional lineage, that certain spaces call to those prepared to experience them. You have passed through trials designed to awaken your inherited potential, to prepare you for the ultimate space. Beneath Hillcrest Manor lies the foundation for my greatest work, a room designed to transform consciousness permanently, to induce perpetual architectural enlightenment. The plans are embedded in this house, in dimensions and proportions perceptible only to those with awakened sensitivity. Complete what I began. Build the ultimate space. Transform not just yourself but all who enter it. Architecture's true potential awaits your implementation. Vernon Reynolds. He was insane, Frank said flatly after Ethan read the message aloud. Genuinely delusional about architecture's psychological effects. But my father believes in this delusion, Ethan pointed out. Has been actively preparing to implement Vernon's ultimate space design, using me as part of the process. The question is, what do we do now? Sarah asked, glancing protectively toward the twins who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the revelations. I know what I'm going to do, Ethan said firmly. I'm going to ensure that Vernon's legacy ends, permanently. No more trials, no more traumatized children in the name of architectural enlightenment. He looked at Frank. Can you use what we found in the observation room to file charges against my father? Frank nodded slowly. Illegal surveillance, invasion of privacy, potentially false imprisonment, if we can prove he deliberately trapped you in that attic. It might be enough for an arrest warrant. And Hillcrest itself? Sarah asked. I'll have the trial mechanisms disabled, the observation systems removed, Ethan decided. Then, he hesitated, an idea forming. Then I'm going to transform it into something that actually helps people, that heals rather than traumatizes. Lily looked up, her natural enthusiasm returning. Like what? A community center, Ethan suggested, the concept taking shape as he spoke. A place for art, education, support services, a building that brings people together instead of isolating them. That's, Sarah began, then paused, her expression softening. That's a wonderful idea, Ethan, truly transformative. The twins could help design the programs, Ethan continued, warming to the concept. Their architecture project could evolve into something practical, something that benefits Millfield. Emma and Lily exchanged excited glances. We could have a library, Emma suggested, and art studios, and a garden in the back where the gazebo is, Lily added, with a reading circle and places for outdoor activities. Ethan felt something shift inside him, a weight lifting. A sense of possibility replacing the anger and confusion that had driven him since his return to Millfield. Vernon had sought to transform consciousness through isolation and trauma. Ethan would transform his legacy into something healing, something that connected rather than separated. It won't be easy, Frank cautioned. Your father won't simply abandon Vernon's work, especially not if he's been planning this for months or years. I know, Ethan acknowledged. But he's just one man, driven by a delusion. We're a community, driven by something stronger. Sarah reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. Whatever comes next, you're not facing it alone. Not this time. Ethan looked around the table at these people who had become, in just a few short days, more like family than his own blood relations had ever been. Sarah, who had saved him twice, once as a child passing water through a wall, and again by opening her home to him when he needed sanctuary. The twins, whose courage and curiosity had freed him from the attic and helped uncover the truth about Vernon's legacy. Frank, whose commitment to justice had persisted across decades. "Thank you," he said simply, "all of you." Outside, darkness had fallen over Millfield, but for the first time since his return, Ethan felt no accompanying anxiety. No need to surround himself with light and water to ward off the memories of confinement. Vernon had designed his trial spaces to isolate, to create dependency and fear. But the ultimate result, one the architect could never have predicted, was this moment of connection, of shared purpose. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's vision for Hillcrest Manor began to take shape. The police, armed with the evidence from the observation room, issued an arrest warrant for James Reynolds, though he had already fled Arizona by the time they arrived. Russell, confronted with evidence of his complicity in maintaining Vernon's trial spaces, retreated into stubborn silence, refusing further contact with Ethan or the authorities. Contractors stripped Hillcrest of its monitoring systems and trial mechanisms, replacing hidden cameras with warm lighting, trapdoors with secure passages. The attic room where Ethan had been confined was transformed into a bright art studio, with large skylights that eliminated any sense of enclosure. The basement observation room became a computer lab for community use. On a crisp autumn morning, 3 months after his arrival in Millfield, Ethan stood on the front steps of the renovated Hillcrest Community Center, preparing to cut the ribbon for its official opening. Beside him stood Sarah, their relationship having deepened from friendship to something more intimate as they worked together on the center's development. The twins, now the center's youngest board members, waited eagerly to guide the first visitors through the transformed space. Frank Morris stood in the front row of the gathered crowd, alongside Martha Wilson, the social worker who had helped design the center's support programs, and George Miller, the local grocer who had donated generously to stock the center's kitchen for cooking classes. Hillcrest was designed by Vernon Reynolds to isolate, to control, to subject people to what he called architectural trials. Ethan began, addressing the assembled community members. "Today we reclaim this space for connection, for growth, for healing." He glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly, her hand finding his in a gesture that had become natural over the past months. "Architecture shapes our experiences, our perceptions, our relationships," Ethan continued. "Vernon understood this power but used it to cause harm. Today we use it to create something better, a space where everyone belongs, where no one is trapped or isolated, where architecture serves human needs rather than controlling them." With a final glance at the transformed facade of Hillcrest Manor, its fresh paint and welcoming entrance replacing the forbidding exterior he had first encountered, Ethan cut the ribbon. The crowd applauded as the doors opened, revealing the bright open interior where walls had been removed, windows enlarged, light welcomed in from every angle. "Ready?" Sarah asked quietly as the visitors began to file inside. Ethan nodded, feeling a sense of peace he had never expected to find in Millfield. "Ready." Together they entered the building, not as prisoners of Vernon's architectural vision, but as architects of something new, a legacy of connection that would endure long after the memories of trials and trauma had faded into history. In the main hall, a mural painted by local artists depicted a gazebo surrounded by flowers, with children reading and playing beneath its open structure. And in the center of the gazebo floor, almost unnoticeable unless one knew to look for it, was a small geometric pattern, not Vernon's triangle circle line, but a new symbol Ethan had designed, a circle broken open, with lines radiating outward like light. Architecture transformed, not to control but to liberate, not the end of a story but the beginning of one.